Okay. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome. I'm Kari the Mortician. We're here for another live interview with a guest. Super excited. We've been trying to do this forever, I think, Kim. So I'm so glad we finally got it lined up. It takes me a while to kind of come around sometimes with things. So today we're talking to Kim Shute, and she has it's called Pocket Grief, pocketgrief.com. I mean, it can't get any easier, and has created a little handbook, a little tool, if you will, that you can carry with you. You can have tucked away in your pocket, your car, to look at, to reference as you're going through different stages of grief. So I'm going to let her tell us more about it. Welcome, Kim.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
So the birth of this project, just briefly, my husband died about 9 years ago. Unexpectedly, turns out he had leukemia. He was away on a trip and he got sick in the hospital a bunch of times and couldn't make it. And so part of the way that I dealt with my grief is to write. I did a lot of writing. And so at the time I was working after he died, about a year and a half after, I started working for a funeral home, and I was noticing that I wanted our grievers to have something that they could have with them when they were feeling, people call them grief bursts or grief attacks or waves of grief. And I wanted them to have like a quick thing that could help them, when they're out in the world and maybe everybody else doesn't understand what they're going through, to sort of help them catch their breath.
Now, what is coming into this, aside from having your own grief walk, what's your education, what's your experience and everything leading up to it?
Does not match. So I have 2 degrees in theater. Actually, I was a performer, and then decided I wanted a baby, had a home birth, decided I wanted to homeschool him, became a gardener and a homeschooling mom. And my husband was a primary wage earner. That was a conscious decision that we made. And and then I had the rug pulled out from underneath me when he went away. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh. And then a friend of mine who actually was one of the clergy for his service approached me and said, I need a bereavement coordinator at the funeral home. What do you think of that? And I was like, it was like 10 or 15 hours a week. And it was basically like she wanted me to be the stage manager behind the scenes for the grief programs. And I was like, I totally know how to do that. So that's what I did.
That's awesome. So you've been at a funeral home then since?
Yeah, I started about 7 years ago. I took a little break from the funeral home I started at for a little while, tried another funeral home, and really just missed my original funeral home. My boss is really great. My coworkers are amazing, and the families that we serve are just incredible.
So what is your touch points with the families and such when you're working with them at the funeral home then?
Yeah, so I'm the director of community relations, and that position evolved from the bereavement coordinator. And so I do a lot of different things. One of the things that I do is I teach quarterly grief classes. Sometimes I teach them more frequently. And then I also do the follow-up phone calls for families, because we don't want families to think that we just care about them, when they're picking out a casket. Like, we want them to know that we know that grief continues throughout, even when the casseroles go away, after they're buried or cremated or whatever, that we're still there for them. And so I call and just say, like, how are you doing with your grief? Is there anything that we can do? And I try to make sure that I'm in touch with all of I call it sort of the grief hub, like that I know who the therapists who specialize in grief are, the grief classes, the grief support groups, and just stay in touch in that way and make sure that our families, and honestly, we serve families that haven't used our services. We just want to make sure.
No, looking so good.
I was wondering if he'd make an appearance.
Oh, he's a loose cannon. It's hard to know what he's going to do. And he was sleeping so good. Our little Eddie monster. He is a full-blown giraffe now. We call him the giraffe because he's so tall and his legs are just, he's still puppy. And so these big old legs don't know what they're doing. It looks like a baby or a baby deer. The deer, we have lots of deer in our backyard, and the baby deer play and they move exactly like he does. And he's like, I want to go play with them. And we're like, no, dude, it will not turn. It won't go well. But he is not convinced that it won't go
Right.
good. So we're
Just
working on
trust
it.
me, Carrie. Just trust me. Just let me.
Yeah, I think he'll get kicked in the face by mom deer or something.
Right.
What'll happen. But
Yes.
I mean, he's terrified of the world. He saw a turtle in the yard one day and he wouldn't even get near it. He like stretched out as far as he could to get near this little baby. You know, he's 80 pounds and the turtle's, you know. So, oh, our Eddie. So yeah, I love that we hear that a lot. People that go to mortuary school, people go into being funeral directors and working in death care because they had a death themselves, and it leads them towards working in a funeral home. Was there a point that you were like, you know, I think this brings up too much emotion in me sometimes, and I don't know that I can really.
Yeah. So I think that part of the reason that I left during the pandemic because we had just done this major project. We brought the Vietnam veterans moving wall to our community, and it took 2 years of preparation. It was this amazing community experience, and it was incredible. So there was a little bit of letdown from that. Then the pandemic hit. I think I stayed, I don't know, for like 6 months or a year once the pandemic hit. But it was like, how do you make community relations happen when everyone has to be socially distanced? And then there was also a part where I thought, you know, maybe this was just part of my journey. Maybe I just needed to do this for a little bit, and maybe that's enough death and I can be done. And then honestly, it just felt like I was this magnet. So even in my personal life, you know, like I'm at the end of a party, everybody's had margaritas, and then someone's like, "Can I talk to you?" You know, and then all of a sudden it's like you know, and I'm not a counselor, right? Like my degrees are not in mental health, although I've done a lot of reading and a lot of webinars and classes and CEUs and stuff, just because I want to make sure that the information that I am teaching people when I do grief classes is good. But I just found that it just kept finding me no matter where I was hiding. And so I was like, okay, I get it. I'm coming back, you know, and I did miss it. But like sometimes, I don't know if I assume this happens for you too. Like I've seen some of your stuff and you're like, yeah, it's emotionally challenging. And so that like the day where it's, you know, I have someone who's my son's age, or the day that we have 3 babies die in a week, or, you know, it's just like the weight of that. And so then the self-care becomes, I mean, it's always important, but it becomes really important when it's taxing in that way.
It does. You know, I always explain it. The movie The Green Mile.
Mm-hmm.
When you work in death care, you are like Michael, is it Michael Clark Duncan or Michael Duncan, where you almost breathe in, you're taking out this, you try and take out the blackness, you know, when you see that movie, he breathes in this blackness that comes out of people that are unhealthy or hurting or whatever. And he takes it in and he carries it then with him the rest of his life. And I feel like that's in death care, like you're explaining, you know, you take in this emotion and then you get home and you're like, what do I do with this? You know, like, how do I process this? Do I breathe it out eventually? I just have that visual some days when I'm at the funeral home that I'm taking in and taking on a lot. And it's like, is this hurting me? Is this heavy inside of me?
Right.
Will this be okay in the long run? And it's mentally so much. And like in your position, when you do work with the families, not just at need, it's the month and the 2 months later, that's when it really gets hard.
Yeah.
You know, everyone thinks, oh, the funeral's hard and then I'll be good. And then, you know, we move on. Well, you're still in that fog. And it's weeks later when everyone else, like you said, the casseroles stop, that all of a sudden you're just sitting there and you're by yourself and you have to do life by yourself in a lot of ways sometimes.
Well, and everybody else returns to their lives, right? So
they moved on.
I remember very clearly the first time that I sat in my living room on the couch without him, and he would sit next to me and he would make me sit on his feet because they were cold. And it was that first time of sitting on the couch by myself. And I used to call it the witching hour, right? Like the time when we would be having dinner together. And then all of a sudden I'm looking around like, okay, everybody else is having dinner with their families. You know, at that point, my son is a late teenager and wanting to be in his room and have nothing to do with me and my very effusive grief. You know, he was like, nope, that's not the way I'm doing this. So anyway, yeah, it's hard. So really hard.
I just had a woman stopped in the other day, and we were just talking, a young mother, and lost her young husband. And she said, I'm plugging along for the kids. And I said, but at night after the kids go to sleep, she goes, yep, that's when the house is quiet and it's just me thinking, and woo.
Why did we just lose light?
And she said, it's those quiet moments where you would usually be with your person, or your kids would be there that are no longer there. Or, you would call your mom, it's just those absence moments. So tell us, do you have one of the books you can show?
I do, but I'm looking at my light crisis at the moment. I just got real dark. So I'm trying to... Oh, well, you knew what I looked like one time. I do. So I wrote two, although the order in which they were published is different. So Grief Surfing was my first one.
Okay.
And this one I did the artwork for, and I wrote the words myself. And then with the Hints for Grieflings, I asked about 4 different artists, and then I finally had a friend who did some art in school, and she said, yeah. And it took us about a year. And I had no idea that the book was incomplete, until I saw the artwork that she created. And then I was like, okay, now this is ready. And I would say that there is a slight preference in terms of people who look at the books. Like, I will often send, as a professional courtesy, I'll send digital copies to people. We do have Hints for Grieflings in Spanish translation as well. But people, mostly they fall in love with the little plant in Hints for Grieflings. The reason that I wanted to do the grief surfing is because that wave analogy, people really like that, and it speaks to them. But anyway, so.
Yeah, I love it's simplistic, but it's very powerful. The words are simple, the drawings are simple, but yet so meaningful in what they're conveying. Just like you said, the little leaf and the little picture, it conveys so much to it that I think you can connect with different parts of it depending where you're at in your journey and what you're feeling in that moment. And like you can see with the size, they are meant for your pocket. They are pocket grief. So pocketgrief.com is where you can purchase these. And are they intended to be purchased like funeral homes to pass out to families? Or
so originally what I had thought was either hospices or funeral homes. Like, the reason that it sort of came to me is that I know some funeral homes that they'll leave a rose. If it's an at-home death, right, they'll make up the bed after they remove the decedent, and then they'll place a rose on the bed. But for me, there was something about the idea that rose then dies. You know what I mean? It feels a little fresh to me to have that visceral reminder of death. And so I wanted them to have something that they could, hold close to them in their purse, in their pocket, in their car, wherever. Because I think that we do live in a relatively grief avoidant society and a little bit grief illiterate. And that's no one's fault. I'm not blaming anyone, but until you go through it, you have no idea.
And everybody goes through it differently. And I think that's such a thing that needs to constantly be pointed out, because that's one of the number one most hurtful phrases that are said, or overstepping phrases, or inappropriate phrases, is trying to tell someone else that you understand how they feel because you've lost X, Y, or Z in your life, and that you know exactly how they feel. And nobody can know how anyone else feels in their loss and in their feelings and emotions and their journey. And so comparing is one of the worst things you can do. And I worked at a funeral home, and this woman had lost her adult son. She was an older lady that kind of just worked around the funeral home, and she had lost her adult son. She never moved through, the whole time I knew her, through the depths of grief. She never got up to I think, normal functioning where it wasn't playing a part in every moment. And she would constantly tell the families, if they had lost their child, like a child, like a little kid, well, I know exactly how you feel, my son. And she would tell them her whole story, and you could see on their face, why are you saying this to me? This is not, okay. I'm sorry for you.
I mean,
You
it's
know,
a weird line to walk, because I find when I do those follow-up phone calls with the family, you know, and in my training as a grief educator, you know, I've taken a bunch of stuff. I'm actually trying to enter the Master of Thanatology program in January at Edgewood College, and as I want to be sure that I'm at the forefront, right? But one of the things that they say is like, it's fine and beautiful that this loss has brought you to this work, but if you are using this work to process your own grief, you should not be doing this work. And so I only use it if I feel like it will help the family. And what I find in those follow-up phone calls is a lot of times people are like, nope, we're fine, thank you, you know, and they want to hang up. But if I can somehow work it in that I too am a griever, not that I'm comparing my grief to your grief, but I know a sliver of what it is that you're going through, all of a sudden it's like the floodgates open, you know. And I don't do it for me. I don't do it for like, I need to process about my dead husband, kind of, you know, like that's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying, like, this is, if this is useful to you, you know. And I mean, I have a lot of families that I need to follow up with many times, you know, that I'm really worried about. And we talk about skills, we talk about tools, talk about things to read. I mean, I think a lot of times grievers, they know what to do and what they need inside themselves. But sometimes you get families that it's like they need a little extra attention and love and empathy, you know?
yeah. Well, someone to comfortably talk to about it, because I think so many people are scared to burden, and I say that in air quotes because that's a word that's used. I don't want to burden my friends. I don't want to burden anybody else. They're tired of me talking about my husband or whoever it is that has died. I don't want to put that on anybody else. So I'm going to just keep it to myself and not talk. And they're so happy when they finally have someone they can connect with, that maybe they meet in a support group that has a common, you know, denominator, like you're saying, like, here's this information a little bit that I have lost someone to, I have walked a road. It's not the one you're on, but you know, I am here to listen because I know how much you need to be listened to.
Right.
If you want to talk, kind of things. That's, I found. So my niece was killed when she was 7, and I cared for her and stuff. And it's one of those things where sometimes I want to tell people, like,
right,
you know, this is, but that's a lot to throw out. It's always like, oh, that's a lot of information in like one sentence kind of thing. But, you know, you work with families with that level of tragedy and that level of, you know, a murder and a, you know, situation. And so you want them to know that but I can't, I keep it in my pocket. I've said it one time and I regret the fact that I said it, just because I feel like I tried to detract from where they were and their everything, you know. So I think there's, like you said, there's a time and there's a place. When they're with me is not exactly the time, but I love that a little down the road, when you're feeling the mountain safer with them, you know, you can share that with them and make a better connection, which I love.
And I mean, the calls that I make are usually 2 weeks to a month out, depending on schedules. You know, sometimes it might be as many as 6 weeks out. And honestly, I feel like that timing is actually a little bit better for folks, because it's like the dust is starting to settle and they're starting to glimpse a little bit of what now this new reality is going to be like. And so, you know, that's a better time. Like, instead of when it feels like they're swooped up in this storm of what is happening, I have to make all these decisions and you know, logistics and things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's when they don't have, you know, you have the funeral to focus on, or the business of the funeral and planning disposition and all of that. During that time, it keeps you a little busy.
Mm-hmm.
And once all that's over, then it's like, the bills are still coming. I got to figure out how to do those. And, well, I guess I got to grocery shop, and they were always the grocery shopper. Or, oh my gosh, I got to figure out how to do banking or do this or do that. And
what are the passwords?
like, I have no idea. Yes, exactly. I mean, my mom was an aftercare coordinator at the funeral home. That's how I got connected when I turned 16 to work at a funeral home. And you know, she would always tell me stories of, you know, the man always wrote the checks, and now, you know, Miss Smith needs to figure out how to write a check or pump gas. And so my mom would go take them to go learn how to pump gas. That was just stuff she did. And I think that's something you don't think about as much, especially the older generation who's older to us. Rules were very much divided now, so not as much, but back in the olden days, very different. And so when you lose that dominant person in one area and you're 80 years old and you have to now refigure out life again.
It's not just 80-year-olds. I feel like I have to hire carpenters for everything now because my carpenter died. And I'm like, oh.
Well, and it's kind of empowering. I remember when I got divorced a couple of years ago and I bought a new house, my house, and I programmed the remote control for the garage door opener.
Woo, go Kari!
A picture of myself. Like it was such a happy moment.
Yep.
And it's when you are going through any kind of loss, a divorce even, or anything, and you finally get something where you feel like I just landed on my feet for a minute. This feels good. You have to kind of celebrate. Yes. Little, maybe a glass of wine was drank. Who knows? Over a glass of water, but it's the little baby things. So, well, hey everybody, if you're just joining us or you've popped in and out, we are talking to Kim Shute, who is a bereavement care coordinator, works at a funeral home out in Massachusetts, and she has written 2 pocket grief little booklets. They seem simple, but they're so amazingly powerful to keep on you if you are walking through any grief journey, whether at the beginning, middle, later down the years down the road. Sometimes you do need to fall back on something and have it on hand. So Kim's telling us about kind of her process of getting there. We are just all over the place talking, which is fine. I love it. Do you have the other book? You showed us which one? The Waves.
I showed you both Hints for Grieflings and Grief Surfing. So here's Hints for
Grieflings. There's the Grieflings. Yep.
I don't know if I have here my Spanish version. These are the 2.
Oh, that's okay.
And I honestly, it's like just an anecdotal story about like why I felt like this was necessary is I remember one of the first times that I was brave enough to go into the grocery store by myself. Oh. And ordinarily, like Stop and Shop does not seem that big and overwhelming, but like in grief, all of a sudden I'm like pushing this cart through the store and it's empty because he was the eater, right? He's 6 feet tall. He's 240 pounds. He has first and second dinner, first and second breakfast. Like he's the eater, know? And then all of a sudden I don't have to buy that anymore. I don't have to buy smoked salmon because I'm a vegetarian. I don't have to buy this. I don't have to buy this. And I've got an empty cart and I just like broke down hysterically crying, and I'm not a person who's particularly shy about my tears. So crying in public is not that embarrassing for me, but I understand that there are people that that's true for. And so I wanted something where it was like, you could pull this out and pull to a page and be like, oh my gosh, okay, gentleness, love, time, and courage are the keys to hope and feeling alive again. Like, in those days that I really didn't want to be alive. And I don't mean that I was actively suicidal, but there's this sort of passive, it would be okay if I didn't wake up, feeling like in those early days of grief that just, and I'd never thought or felt like that before. And so I wanted people to feel like they had a friend in their pocket who understood what they were going through.
And you can go to pocketgrief.com. There's a shop button and to check these out. They're $6. $6. Super inexpensive. Or if you're with a funeral home or hospice, you can order them in bulk for clients, patient families, things like that. So check that out as you guys are joining with us. What questions do you have for Kim? Drop them over in the chat here. I'm trying to read through all the comments as everybody is chatting away. Now you said you have a teenager.
Oh, well, I have an almost 25-year-old. It's like, oh, God, how did that happen? Oh,
he was a teenager when my husband died. have you thought of doing something geared towards
So
that
the
age?
reason I named my business Pocket Grief is the idea had been that I wanted to do both different types of losses and different audiences, right? But I need to be working with other people who, you know what I mean? It's like I didn't have a suicide loss, and so it would feel inauthentic for me to write a book about suicide loss or whatever. But yes, absolutely, 100%. And children's bereavement was critically important for both my journey and my son's journey. We went for about a year and a half to the children's bereavement program in Rhode Island, which is where we lived when he died. So yeah, 100%. That's what I would love, is to have a series of books that, you know, because there are so many types of loss where people feel forgotten, you know, whether it's an overdose death or a sibling loss or, you know, Alzheimer's, like all these different ways of losing people and relationships. They deserve attention, you know, and care, and to feel seen and to feel heard and witnessed. Do you know what I mean?
Yep. Just something to acknowledge the different, you know, I think everybody, when people ask me like, what families are hard to deal with, or, you know, what loss that you experience, and I'm like, it's not about a generalized area of, oh, baby, caring for babies is the hardest. It's about the people in the moment and different things, and everybody's loss is huge in their worlds. And that's what we have to acknowledge is, you know, sometimes we're like, oh, they're a veteran, we need to like put them up here. Veterans are very, very special, but you know, the non-veteran is just as big of a loss to their family. So, you know, we can acknowledge the service and stuff, but every loss is just as important. And I try to reiterate that to some of the newer, you know, students and people coming into the business. Like, you put all this importance on some specific losses, but everybody's loss is large in their life and large in their what's happening within their family and everything. And we have to kind of recognize that in every way, because it may not seem like a big deal to us. Oh, they were 95. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Oh,
I honestly, I mean, in the classes that I teach, the people that come to my classes, it blows my mind. Like I had sisters show up sometime last year to one of my programs. Their mom was 103 years old when she died. They were devastated as if they were teenagers who had just lost their mom. I mean, and then I had another woman come last year at some point, and she was 90 something. She had lost everybody who was important to her in her life, which I actually feel like we don't do a very good job of dealing with cumulative loss, like once people start to get older. But she said, you know, I've lost everybody, but the one that really is sticking in my craw is I lost my daughter 50 years ago. So like the idea that can still bring up such intensity for her 50 years after the fact. You know what I'm saying? That's a lot.
what I want, you know, it's interesting. There's people who will come to my YouTube channel or different platforms, and they'll watch for a while and they'll make little comments, and then eventually they'll send me an email and they'll ask a question, and they'll say, you know, I'll never so there was this woman, and she emailed me on behalf of her mom, and she said, my mom is in her 80s, and my brother, somebody died when like 50, 60 years ago. Like, that wouldn't make sense. But anyway, it was many decades ago. And mom had been at unrest and in this throes of grief, she said, for all these years.
Right.
Because she had one thing that was unsettling to her. She asked me the question. I gave her an answer. 2 days later, she comes back and emails me, and she said, my mom is at such peace because you answered her question. And I think some of the grief that maybe carries is from questions that people have, or something that they're concerned about or connected to, that's not even just the loss. It was about something that happened maybe during the process, or like with suicide, the why sometimes is never fully figured out. What's it called? Not survivor's guilt kind of carries that. Some people see that as grief, but it's really not just the grief. Or they never had a service. That's one big thing. And tell me from you what you're seeing, these families who do nothing. They literally, well, mom didn't want anything. She kind of guilts them into, don't have anything. So then they don't have anything. They cremate or stick her on a shelf.
Yeah.
And then they wonder why life is really, really hard.
So this is, I feel like, a place where we as people who work in funeral service can change the narrative, because I feel like it's never too late. And the model, right, of funeral service has changed even in the time probably that you've been in the field, right? Which you've been in the field like 24 years or something.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, one, we handle grief differently. We actually are having a public conversation about it now, right?
Yes.
We can educate people, but it's not like somebody dies Monday and they're in the ground by Wednesday. It's no longer that model very much, right? Like you can actually, and I know that that's funeral service probably is like, no, don't tell them to take all the time in the world. But what I am saying is that if it feels unresolved because you never did something, that it is never too late. That it is possible. Like, I want all the funeral homes in the world to have a never too late package where it's like geared towards, like, if you didn't do anything because mom said, oh, I don't care, throw me in a ditch, throw me in a pine box, I don't care. My mom actually just passed less than a month ago. And she was one of those people, but I engaged her in that conversation while she was alive and said, well, have you ever thought that I'm going to be left behind, your only child, like that I matter, that I might need something? And she said, oh, that never occurred to me. I was like, are you serious? I work in funeral service. How did that not occur to you?
Well, and I always tell people, ask the question, does this meet the needs of you as a family? Like, yeah, that was what mom said, but there's a lot of people that don't want attention on themselves. They're not going to say, oh, please go do all this for me. They're not those kind of people, but saying, okay, we can, do the disposition, do some of what mom wanted, but does not having a service meet your needs? Or do you feel you need to do something? And I've had so many families, and it's not about having business in the funeral home, but it's about helping them figure out what they're going to do. Especially with cremation, I'm always like, so what are you going to do when you take home the cremated remains? And they're like, well, we haven't thought about it. And I'm like, well, what are your options? And try and, like, you guys are all here. Let's talk about if, let's come up with a plan of some kind, or let me tell you what's illegal. Let me tell you what other options are. Let's talk through how simple it can be. And I've had, some people just have a meal. Have a meal that was mom's favorite. Just have a meal.
I have to tell you that I'm sort of like a serial memorializer, because like when my husband died, it was like we did a service for him in Newport. Then I took his remains to Idaho, where he's from. We did it at the year anniversary. We had a dinner for 50. At the 5-year anniversary is when we buried him. And I turned him into a diamond so that he's with me. Like I've done all of the things, and honestly, every single thing. And then, of course, obviously, I've written so many blog articles, and I've written these books, and I've done all these things. And I really feel like every single one of those things that I've done has helped me integrate it and get back to living life.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a different person. Sometimes I feel like I'm a little diminished, but those are really on my down days. This is just all of who I am now. This is just part of my experience. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like it's really important. I just feel like memorialization is really, really important. And no one brainwashed me to say that. And I didn't even, because my husband died in Taiwan, I didn't deal with a US funeral home. Like, wow. I had to have him cremated there in very short order because I had to leave the country. And I knew just in passing he wanted to be cremated, So it was like, so nobody is paying me to say these things. I genuinely believe this in my heart of hearts, that it helps us to heal, and to continue the relationship with them, that continuing bond. Like, it used to be like, come on, let's move on, get over this. And I think we know now that that's not the best way. It's not the healthiest way.
It doesn't have to be stop and move on to the next thing. Like, okay, they're in the ground now, move on to the next phase of life. Yes, you move into a new phase, but it's not like it's a brand new next. It's not like you go back to the original just without the person there. There's a lot to it. But just something simple is so important to do. It doesn't have to be big and grand. It doesn't have to be a public invite. It can just be you going to dinner by yourself at your favorite place and take a journal and sit and write about your loved one while you're sitting there. I did a career fair at a high school last year, and this sweet girl walks up to me at the end, and I could tell she was getting ready to cry. And I said, "Hi, it's nice to meet you." And she said, hold on one sec. Let me close this.
Yeah.
And she said, this woman who was like a mom to me died, and our formal dance is this weekend, and I have to go because of whatever reason. And I have to miss her service. And she said, and I'm just so heartbroken. And she starts crying, and I'm hugging her in the middle of this big career fair thing. And I said, well, what did you love doing with her? And she said, well, the best was when her kids and her and I would just go on a little road trip, and we'd go find, some snacks at a gas station, and we'd go on a little adventure. I said, well, talk to your friends. I said, pick a date and go do that. And every time you stop, take a picture or share a memory and have it be a fun something that you do in memory of her. I said, if that's what makes you think of her, do it in memory of her again. And it'll be hard, but you guys are going to have a good time while moving through some of those emotions as you're kind of mentally saying goodbye in some ways to the past to move into the next. And so she was like, that's such a great idea. And so it can be that simple, but sometimes people don't think of that as being what could be done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think so too. I have this friend, she became my friend in a knitting group after, my husband passed, and she too is a widow, like a year ahead of me. And every year on her husband's death anniversary, which is what I call it, he loved Guinness, and she gets her two sons together, and they go to his favorite bar, and they just toast him, and I think that it's those little things that are so personal. And that's the most important thing, is to make sure that it's comforting to you. And it also, like, I feel like there's that balance, right, of the taking care of those who are left behind while you're honoring their memory.
Yeah, I think it's so important to do. Well, check out pocketgrief.com, everyone. These little pocket grief booklets that you can carry. So many things there. There's also, you said you were blogging and stuff, and there's links to some articles on there that you can check out as well that Kim has wrote. So go look at there. Where else can people find your stuff? Are you anywhere else that?
So I'm on the funeral home website, memorialfuneralhome.com, out of Newport, Rhode Island. I actually just wrote 2 or 3 articles because, as I said, it'll be the month anniversary for my mom's death tomorrow. And so I've been really writing a lot about that, and realizing, when you're a caregiver for someone, it's a different kind of grief. Like being through the experience with my husband, my father's died, now my mother's died, and every single one of those griefs is different, and my response to it is very different. So I forgot what you asked me, but hopefully it was relevant.
What did I ask? Oh, if there's anywhere else people can find content.
Yeah, so on the funeral home website, there's definitely some of my blog content is on there right now.
Okay, and what's that website?
It's memorialfuneralhome.com.
That's simple.
Yeah.
Nice. Very cool. Well, thank you for joining me. This has been
Thank you so much for being so persistent and finally having me on. We got there.
It takes us the seasons lining up correctly. I was at Cana Convention, which is the Cremation Association of North America. I was there last weekend, and this guy who had talked to at NFDA convention last fall, the same week, he was like, I thought you were going to come visit and do a video. And I was like, wow, it's been a year. Holy,
welcome to living life, right?
Busy, and you have got between kids and Eddie and all of it and work. And all of a sudden weeks and months pass and you are like, oh, okay, I haven't.
Well, you're clearly the only one that's guilty of that. That never happened.
I am it. So, like, I can't say if it takes me like a week or two to respond to an email, I feel like the worst person. And people will have so much grace. They'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm surprised you even responded to me at all. And I'm like, what, someone would do that and not respond? That's terrible. So I guess I'm doing better than
it's probably because everyone's fangirling because they're like, oh my God, Kari the Mortician.
That's the weirdest. And I know it sounds super cliche, but like meeting at Cana, you know, meeting some people in the business that are like, oh my gosh, and it was funny because I'd be talking to people and then I would say who I am and they would then kind of give a big dramatic. And I'm like, do I look that bad in person? Do I like, what is the difference between that? It doesn't, but then as soon as they say it and they're like, oh my gosh, and I'm just me. I don't feel like hardly anybody watches anything or is, you know, like knows who I am. So it just blows my mind. Josh always follow, you know, if he's with us, he loves that people recognize me and he likes me having a little love from people kind of thing. But it's he's like, babe, people know you. And I'm like, I don't know. But even he gets recognized, which I think is hilarious. He's had people drive through the cemetery and go, hey, you're Josh the Vault guy. And his coaches are like, what's going on, dude? Like, why are you driving through? And he's like,
yeah, I would recognize him too. I'd recognize both of you, whether it was on your podcast or if it was at the NFDA conference, because I know.
Well, sometimes I'll be like, that person seems to be staring at me. And I never think, and Josh will be like, well, maybe they watch your stuff. And I'm like, but wouldn't they come over and say something? And he's like, he goes, I don't think I would go approach someone if it was me, just because I would be nervous and worried. So if you guys see me, come say hi. Yeah. If, you know,
I think though, like when you meet someone who's sort of in your mind as a star, like I met someone one time, like a folk musician that I love so much. I walked into a food co-op and I went, oh my God, Billy Jonas, like right in his face, you know, and he was like, hello, you know, he was normal, but I was a freak. So I'm sure that that's what people are afraid they're going to do to you. Like, wah!
We do have one question I want to say. So, Kay the mom, hi, may I ask, how do you get over grief when your husband passed away in a fire? It's been shouldn't a shock from my son who is 17.
Yeah. So the phrase
you have, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in general, the phrase "get over," I'm not sure that that's going to be a thing, right? It's just going to be a part of the story moving forward. You know, my son was about 16 when his dad died, although not the way that her husband did. I made sure to get him a therapist. I made sure to get him into a bereavement program. And I made sure to get myself some support. You know, and it varies, like what's the thing that you're struggling with specifically. You know, for me, eating was really hard. And so I had to put a lot of focus on making sure that I could eat so that I could be there for my kid. You know, so I love this book. I have it right here, which it sounds like this might apply for this woman. It's Transforming Traumatic Grief. It's by Courtney Armstrong. It says 6 steps to move from grief to peace after the sudden or violent death of a loved one. And that was huge for me because it talks about people who are resilient grievers and what they have in common and what they can do. So I did every day 20-minute body scan to like check in with my body. I got outside and moved my body. I made sure to see people and I made sure to reach out for help when I needed it, even though I wish we lived in a world that a griever didn't have to do that work and advocate for themselves, but that's not yet the world that we live in. And so I would, if I noticed that I was not doing well and I was isolating, because I think that there's a difference between isolation and taking time that you need to be alone and with your feelings. Like those are very different. So let people know that you trust and have them regularly touch base with you. You know, like have a call Tuesdays at 5 with Maggie and or maybe I don't know, like my son also, he made sure that he had a lot of friends, because sometimes he just wanted to go be normal, like he just wanted to not think about the fact that his dad was dead. And that was another piece. I'll try to wrap up, but for my son, it was huge to know that there are other kids out there in the world who also had lost their dad. Like that I felt like, especially in the teen years, right? It's like, I think that the experience of a teen is like, oh my God, I'm the only one. I can't be different in this way. This is terrible. And it doesn't matter what way that is, but like when it's the death of a parent, it feels, and it's huge, but to know, and my son went to community college and he started meeting other people whose fathers were also dead. And he was like, there's a lot of people with dead fathers out there, and I mean, I don't mean to be flippant, obviously her very, but like for him, it like cracked something open in him that it's like, okay, other people are capable of doing this. Maybe I can do this too. So I don't know if that is helpful at all.
Well, teenagers, I think, especially, or, young preteen, you don't want to be different. And you don't want this like badge of a stigma that you almost feel like everyone can see. Like, so my girls, my daughter who's 11 was like, Mom, nobody else has divorced parents. Nobody else knows what's going on. Everybody else has both their parents. And I was like, oh, honey girl, let's step back and look at the people we know. I'm like, we have 3 friends that have parents that are dead. We've got numerous divorced parents or remarried with stepbrothers, sisters. They're all over. We've got people who live with their grandparents because their parents are out of the picture, in prison. I said, look at the gamut, honey. You are not one child who has this bad scenario. I said, it's all around you and everybody's working through it in their own way. I said, they probably look at you and think you have so much that maybe they don't have. For what, like, oh, that must be cool to have 2 houses and 2 bedrooms because of, I said, so the grass is always greener, honey. And you always worry about what people are thinking about you because that's just how we are. But once you start looking around, you realize there's the big pool is
well,
not.
And you're in your life experience. So it's hard to remember. But the other thing that I wanted to say about the 17-year-old is another thing that I did is my son went to 2 different bereavement camps. Specifically, he went to Camp Experience and he also went to an Outward Bound thing in Maine, although he did not love that experience, but he liked the Camp Experience. And I think that those were steps in his healing, but also just knowing, like for me, it was a long learning curve to understand that he and I are such different. We are so different in the way that we handle grief. Like I'm a combination griever. Like I think about it, but I also feel about it, but I have no compulsion about just expressing it. Whereas he sort of locks it down and will often, his stomach will have an opinion, is what I'll say. So anyway, I mean, I hope that those things can be of comfort, but like to know that, I mean, part of when I fell in love with this work was about a year after I had my job and I actually was helping on a funeral service. It was a special service, but it was weird because I had known the man. He was the same age as my husband was a year earlier. And it was a situation where it was we thought he was perfectly healthy. And then the next day he died. He had a daughter who was the same age as my son. They knew each other. And I worked at a funeral. And I remember watching the mom come in and just the vision of her was like this keening, just like the pain from the depth of her soul. And I remember looking at her and being like, I'm not there anymore. Like I know that feeling that she's having and that she's experiencing, and I'm not there anymore. But it's hard to see the steps as you're in it. Like that you're actually, I mean, you're not getting better, you're getting different. Right. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, I think I can help people. I think that I can help people. So hopefully.
I think that's important you may feel like you're not making any strides and that you might be stuck, but then being able to recognize someone else's grief and realize how far you've come to a place of, having a new life and it's up and running and you're not controlled by the grief like you are in that beginning. I think that's such a great thing to recognize, like you just said, that you don't realize sometimes how far you've come, I think, in some of that.
The other thing that was really a turning point for me in my grief was I happened to this woman who I happened to know, and she kept saying, "You need to talk to my son. You need to talk to my son." And I'm like, "Why the heck do I need to talk to your son? Who is your son?" And it turns out that her son, his wife had died in her 30s, which had been like 5 or 7 years ahead of me. So he was ahead of me in the path, and he basically played grief mentor for me. Like, he listened to me at 10:30 at night, and I got to hear his story. And then he sent me his writing that he wrote when she died.
Wow.
And like, he was dating again, and he, his son was okay. And like, I all of a sudden, because I feel like sometimes what happens in those early days of grief, it's like you have no use for the word hope. You cannot imagine. And in fact, the word hope is like, offensive in some ways. How can I have hope? Do you see what I'm going through right now? And then he really gave me a sense that there was hope for me and hope for my son. And so having a buddy that has been through it and can listen to you and witness it is hugely valuable.
I want to go back on one thing you said just for a second, because I think this is important that a lot of people don't know exist, are camps for kids who have had loss. And they have the one near us called Camp Anew. And the way they explain it is all like-minded children who get to just go be kids and not have to worry about if they say something about their dad who died, or say, yeah, when my dad died, blah, 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 and then have to step back and almost feel bad, like, because you said it, and
make everybody else uncomfortable.
And just be normal for that week that you're there. And they have them where they are very specific, where it's, children of people who died in the military, people who
cancer,
died, all these different specialties. So Google search that. If you have a kid, you have someone that needs maybe that outlet, they often have scholarships and ways to pay for it, so you're not paying to go there. So check into those things. I've got a friend whose son goes to one in Wisconsin every year. He looks forward to it. It's 1 week a year that he gets to go be with people who understand some of his walk and some of what he can share about. And he can share, he cannot share, but he's around just like-minded kids, and they've become friends and they can connect throughout the year. And I just love that. And
a lot of hospices actually will offer camps for kids in the summertime. Sometimes it's day camps, sometimes it's sleepover camps. So hospices, the National Alliance for Grieving Children, the Dougie Center, those are all really great resources. Camp Aaron, experience camps. I mean, there's just so many. And it's run by volunteers and professionals who really know what they're doing and want your kids to be okay.
Yeah. And it's not, as a teenage boy, I could see a kid going, I don't want to go sit around with a bunch of kids talking about death all week.
No.
And that's not what it is at all. But you can see that a kid would react. What do you mean I got to go hang out in a cabin and talk about death and the fact my dad's dead and blah, blah. And it's not what it is. No, but it's a nice, safe place that they can be as open or not. The support is there for them if they do need it and want it, and they get to just have fun. And I love that. I love that those camps, like, they need adult versions of that. I know they have adult camps, but man, they need an adult grief camp. That would be freaking awesome.
Well, I think they do for, like, there's widow camps and stuff like that, but I feel like they're not as fun and carefree as the kid ones, I mean, and I'm sure that they have value for people. I have not done them first experience. I've read a lot about them, but there's something about with the kids camps and the teen camps they really just want those kids to be kids, and they want to normalize that grief for them and be like, look, you know, you are normal. Your experience is normal, no matter what you're feeling or thinking. Like, unless you're thinking of hurting someone else or yourself, right? Like, they're going to take care of those crises type moments. But like all the other stuff, they're there for those kids.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Again, guys, pocketgrief.com. Kim has written these 2 great pocket guides for grief that you can carry on you. You can give to friends. One, Lisa did ask, can you order on your website, like order from me, but you actually ship it to someone else?
I think I have done that. If you send me a message, like there's a way for you to contact me on the website. If you send me a message and say, look, I want to order this for so-and-so, I can then do that, and I can even write a little note and enclose it with the books if that's needed.
Because I think that is nice, when people are going through, the funeral time and stuff, you don't want to send flowers. You want to send something that's maybe supportive or schedule, say, in a month, put a little reminder on your phone, go order this for my friend and send it to them a few weeks out down the road that they can have it, because every funeral home does not have the support aftercare that some do, and they don't provide the resources. People may be in communities that don't have the support groups through hospice or through different churches or through the funeral home. And so there are areas that need extra little support. So it's a way to show you're thinking about someone and want to just give them a little something. So think about that, guys.
Carrie, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye, guys. We'll see you on our next live video. Just so you know what's coming up, we have, let me grab my schedule because I got a bunch of guests lined up for the next couple months. We're going to have young man who is starting a pet crematory. He's a funeral director, starting a pet crematory. We've got a young man who's worked in a funeral home since he was 14. I've known him since then, and he is now a licensed funeral director. I've been with him through the whole journey and followed along. I just love him. He's one of my favorites. We've got a female funeral director who's a single mom to talk about her kind of working in the funeral home. Todd Hara, who has written several books within death care. We got Sharon G., who wrote the textbook on embalming. She's amazing. One other, there's a company called One Last Wave. I've been wanting to interview them. I don't know if you've heard of them, Kim. They take a surfboard and they will write your loved one's name on it.
I did just hear about that.
And they take them for one final ride and then retire it. And so they fill these surfboards with all these names, take it for a ride and retire. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of, it's unbelievable how many names they've included. So we've got the gentleman who runs that One Last Wave coming on to talk about that. It's fun. I'm loving this, getting to kind of interview people live and let you guys ask questions live. Technology is becoming better and better with some things. So thank you. Well, thanks, Kim. Have a great rest of your week. And thanks for joining me. Bye, guys. See you soon.